Welcome to the Millennial Body Image Project, where we dive into the unique and messy body image journey that continues to shape our generation.
We're here to flip the script on toxic wellness culture, challenge weight stigma, and tackle the intersectional forces that shape how we see our bodies and our health.
Because your body is not a problem to be fixed.
Perimenopause, take 2. Oh my God. If you thought the last episode was all we were going to do to talk about perimenopause, buckle up because we have a couple coming for you. But today's episode is for all of the girlies out there who are scrolling at night and are seeing these reels and TikToks about all the things they should be doing and how they have perimenopause and they're thinking to themselves, that sounds like me. Or is it? And you listen to our last episode and you're feeling more confused than ever and you're wondering, what do I do now? This episode is for you because we're going to walk you through what you can do to support any of those things that we talked about in the last episode. Is it perimenopause? Is it thyroid? Is it stress? We don't know. Is it the world's imploding? Possibly. Could it be any number one of these things that are influencing each other? So what we're going to do today is we're going to break down for you, how do I do something about this? And I want to do something about this, but I don't want to go completely psycho and crazy and micromanage everything that I'm eating. And I also am living in reality. And I can't do that kind of thing even if I wanted to, and I don't want to feel bad if I don't. And so we want to give you the things that you can do to really help yourself with supporting these things if you're going through it. And we're not saying it's going to cure it because nothing can cure perimenopause. But what we are saying is that you can support your system. And today's episode is for all the people who are like, I want to do something, but I don't know what, and I'm bombarded with information that feels confusing, and I feel like I have to do it all, and I don't know where to begin. And so you started buying supplements online and started going crazy, and you're like, what am I doing?
We're going to talk about that too. Mm-hmm. I love how you were like, because we live in reality. I wanted to be like, as much as we would love to not live in reality.
Oh my God, seriously. Because reality is recording this podcast and then jumping in the car to pick up Melody and then pick up our friend and then bring them back over here. That's my reality.
Well, reality is also living in the hellscape that we're in right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like a whole nother, that's like this other looming like cloud over it. And then I have the day-to-day-ish that we're going through all the time of like logistical things.
Mm-hmm. So first we wanted to briefly talk about a bunch of the things that we are seeing and hearing from our clients that are being marketed towards millennial women because we're the ones in the like, is it perimenopause? Is it stress? Is it thyroid? They're trying to take advantage of our wallets and like our insecurities and everything like that, right? So we're hearing so much about protein and creatine and walking programs and weighted vests and hormone balancing supplement blends, herbs, blah, 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 blah. And also fasting, low carb, no carb. It would be so easy to make a perimenopause version of the wellness productivity checklist with all of these things, and it would literally become your full-time job trying to do all of this. So this is what we don't want to do.
Totally. I saw this, just sidetrack real quick, go on this road with me. It's all relevant. But I saw this influencer the other day talking about how it was overwhelming to get all of these things, like these ads about what they should be doing. They're like in their 50s or something. They were talking about all this stuff. I was like, yes, someone talking about that. And then it switched to her. But what if I just did it? What if I just said yes to adding this in? And I did yes to doing this. And I did yes to do that. And it totally switched gears. And I was like, oh, like, don't do this to me. Why are you doing this? And it immediately switched to, well, I want to do all these things. And so here I am. I'm doing all the things. And I'm like, oh my God, why? Why?
I thought you were going to be like, and then it turned into an ad for this person who was sponsored by this wellness productivity checklist with a discount code in the comment.
No, there was nothing like that. But it was basically her saying, yes, so now I've made this checklist of all the things and I am saying yes to doing all of them. And at first I was like, but why did we go with the instinct of this is overwhelming and why don't I fact check stuff? Like, because we don't. We think like there is this like morality around it of like, if I say no to doing the stuff that the girlies are telling me to do, then I'm somehow not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Whereas how do we know what made them in charge of deciding what we are or are not supposed to do? How do we know what we're getting fed is even factual or evidence-based or anything like this? And then to put out there that like, well, what if I said yes? As like almost there's some like it's wrong if I say no.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was kind of like, this is shitty.
Yeah. I think that is the domineering marketing is like, you have to do this and it's on your responsibility to take care of yourself because the marketing is truly that like perimenopause is something that is wrong and needs to be fixed with us as we start to go through that period. It's not wrong. It's literally a natural process of life. And it's really just about adapting and learning a little bit more about what the changes are going to be and then figuring out what are the most intrusive changes for you that are declining your quality of life and how can we go about managing some of those in a non-diet, non-restrictive, non-extreme, non-perfectionist way. So just because we're saying no to every single thing all at once doesn't mean that we're saying no to all of these things individually taken in a moderate, more balanced approach and figuring out how you can practically and realistically fit that into your life so it's supportive of your life instead of trying to fit your life into this little wellness productivity checklist that promises it's going to fix everything for you. And no, it's actually not. It's just going to create more stress, which is going to throw your hormones even more out of balance.
Yeah, it's like number one. It's interesting too, because I think what it is also, we're really like laying it out so clearly that there's this narrative in that influencers conversation about it is that it's either all or nothing. And it's either I'm saying this is overwhelming and I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to say yes to doing everything without thinking about what would actually be supportive of me without getting an education around it or just taking things as point blank of if you're not doing all of the things, then you might as well throw everything out and it doesn't matter and you're not doing anything. And that is the premise of all diets.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change, Christina.
Yeah, whatever. They can shut it. So if we're here trying to do a non-diet approach to things, then let's take a non-diet approach to perimenopause. And what does that look like? How do we support and be less obsessive? Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I think in order to get to that point, we do want to understand a little bit more about what is going on with our bodies, which can then give us direction of, oh, here's how we can support this with a non-diet approach that includes nutrition, that includes movement, that may, working with a practitioner, includes some third-party tested supplements, not some random shit that you got off the internet.
Not hormone harmony, guys. My God. That's an episode for another week. We're going to do a whole supplement takedown.
Yes, I was going to say, Christina had this fantastic idea of we need to do a supplement takedown episode. And I was like, why have we never called our supplement episodes before supplement takedowns? That is phenomenal. I wish we could TM that. We can't. But yes, you'll see that coming soon. But so when we're going through the perimenopause transition, and it's literally called a transitional phase, right? Your ovaries are gradually producing less estrogen, although you're going to fluctuate all over the place. And so if you're starting to experience irregular menstrual cycles, symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, changes in like your hair or your skin, these are all indicators that this may be a piece of the puzzle. However, like we talked about in the episode from 2 weeks ago, there are also a lot of those symptoms can also overlap with burnout, extremely high stress, and also thyroid conditions, which burnout and extremely high stress can contribute to thyroid conditions and could also make these perimenopause symptoms worse.
And also, too, is it perimenopause or is your hormones just not getting enough support? There's a lot of different layers here at play. And I think if you're a woman of a certain age, they're going to plug you into being perimenopausal, and that might not necessarily be entirely true. And so that's just something to consider as well. But let's get into some approaches and things that we can do to support this and how we can do this. Because I think the number one thing is we really want you guys to be centered in how to nourish yourself how to be self-compassionate, and how to trust your body while adapting to any kind of hormonal shifts. And we want to support all of the different things that are happening. But Dana, you weren't done talking about perimenopausal. Were you all done?
Signals.
The signals?
We can talk a little bit. So more of the decline in estrogen and the symptoms that go along with that, you will see more aggressively, let's say, when you finally get into actual menopause, which technically you're in menopause when you have missed your period for an entire year. And technically, perimenopause could start when 2 of your cycles are missed. However, important caveat here, that can also happen with PCOS. That can also happen with amenorrhea. That can also happen with undereating and overtraining. So this is why it's so confusing when we're in this transitional phase. Is it perimenopause or is my ponytail just too tight? I have no idea. So
my ponytail too tight. True life, that is an actual thing. Yes.
I mean, I get frequent headaches, and when I'm going through my checklist, I'm like, did I have too much coffee? Have I not had enough water? Have I not eaten enough in the last 3 hours?
Fun for the last 12 hours straight, and I need to do it.
Is my ponytail too tight? Is the world on fire? Like different things, right? Like we're literally going through all of these different checklists when it comes to perimenopause or headaches, right? What we want to help you do is start to understand some of the signals that your body might be sending you so we can start to, as Christina used to say in our very long ago Break the Diet Cycle course, start to speak the language of our bodies. And so
oh my God, that is a
throwback. This was like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. But I think that one of the things that can be really helpful in starting to figure out of is this perimenopause or is this something else is getting some data. You guys know I love the data, right? This doesn't mean calorie tracking. This doesn't mean macro tracking. Okay, let's do a disclaimer here. This means that it is helpful to start tracking your cycles if you don't do that already, because it's very easy to forget the last day that you've had your period or the first day of 2 cycles ago. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast 4 days ago. You're asking me what my cycle was 6 months ago? That's crazy.
I know because I eat the same thing every day.
What's that? But what if 4 days ago I ran out of my hyperfixation breakfast, Christina?
I mean, I've been hyperfixating on this breakfast for the last 7 years.
Okay, back to tracking.
Sorry.
So, no, totally fine. I would recommend that you start tracking not only the bleeding phase of your menstrual cycle, but then also, do you have spotting? Do you get headaches? Do you get hot flashes? In addition to the types of maybe PMS type symptoms that you may have already been experiencing for a long time. But what we want to start to notice is major shifts in those symptoms. Are they starting to happen at different times of the month? Is your period starting to get farther in between? Is the consistency of your period changing? And we're talking about the literal blood here, right? So as you're starting to get more data about your body, we can start to figure out, okay, is this really perimenopause or is it something else? And then as we get into the other things to look out for, I'm sure Christina wants to go into the nourishment part of this. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely do. Because yes, on the one hand, we want to understand what's going on with our body. But I think the thing that is targeting people the most and making you feel as drawn to feeling like maybe I have perimenopause is the symptoms that you're feeling. Some of the things that I keep thinking about is when we talk about the nourishment aspect of it, is that people will say, I feel like I have a lot of brain fog, or I don't feel like I have as much energy, or I'm feeling kind of tired all the time, or I don't understand why I don't have as much energy, or when I go to the gym, I feel really tired afterwards,
or I have unexplained weight gain.
I'm putting quotes around that because people get really attached to those things, right? It's very emotionally driven. And also, this is impacting my day-to-day life, right? Is my metabolism slowing down? Do I need a metabolism reset? One of the ways to have the best quality of life shift happen that's really supportive for your hormones, no matter where you are in the perimenopause cycle, is by nourishing yourself and blood sugar management without micromanaging your food. But a lot of people get stuck in that, well, how do I do that? And to me, that really comes down to learning the signals of your body, understanding the fluctuations that you might have, that might impact it. Like you might notice like, oh, leading up to my cycle, I get really tired or I have a change in my appetite. I'm really hungry or I'm having these cravings. Instead of labeling that as bad, understand that this is natural and is going to happen at different times during your cycle. And here's how I can, one, honor those cravings. And at the same time, make sure that I'm giving myself my energy trifecta. I'm having a mixture of my macronutrients throughout the day, and my meals are feeling supportive and giving me the energy that my body needs, and also honoring those cravings. And so to me, it's really about how will this change my day-to-day life in that moment? Because yes, we want to support the perimenopause, right? But we also aren't going to stop perimenopause. Like that's not what's happening. It's more about how do I hear what my body is trying to tell me, and then how do I respond by supporting my body through nutritional support without obsessing over each thing. And that can look very different for each person's needs, might be a little bit different. And so that's where I get a little frustrated when we start hearing stuff like, you need this many grams of protein. And so that might be you, girl, but that's not necessarily me. And how do we know exactly what that looks like? And we want to break down for you how to support your hunger and your fullness without obsessing.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's
Yeah.
really about the energy trifecta.
Yes. And I think it's important to also go back to the word that you've been saying over and over again is support.
Oh.
And we have talked about this a long time ago, but I can't remember the last time that we talked about this. But there's a lot of conflating supporting your health or like supporting certain things with always restricting or like always eliminating things. Like that is the old like chronic dieting way of things. That's also like the functional medicine way of doing things, right? So if you were to go to, let's say you've gone to your primary care and they're like, nah, your thyroid looks fine. And you're like, okay, I'll go to endocrinologist. And they're like, nah, your thyroid looks fine. And so then you go to functional medicine or something like that. And they're like, oh, we're going to do all this stuff. But also you need to eliminate the big whatever, like the gluten, the dairy. Yeah, the gluten, the dairy, the sugar, the soy, the blah, 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 blah. Like all the whole wellness productivity diet checklist, right? Yeah. Whereas we're trying to flip that on its head, because when I'm thinking about supporting, I'm thinking about what can I add in to make sure that my body has some extra help. Now, of course, this is different if you have celiac or if you have an allergy. We're obviously not going to tell you to eat the thing that is making you feel awful, right?
I don't want to say that anymore. Like, obviously, guys, like Jesus, right? Come on, guys.
Yes, but I think it's important to be said that to clarify that when we say support, we don't mean removing all of the things. And we don't mean adding things in to an extreme. Hopefully I will have posted this by this point, but I recorded this reel last night that was like, the PCOS girlies have gone wild. We're eating oodles and oodles of protein in amounts that your body can't even digest. Why are we recommending fasting for blood sugar? That's the opposite way that you want to go. Why are we recommending high-intensity interval training and extreme weightlifting and all of this stuff? And this is coming from somebody who loves weightlifting, but not to an extreme. We are not Olympic athletes. We don't need to be training like them, okay?
Also, one of the things that I find to be really interesting, yes, I can't wait for this reel to come out. I'm sure it's going to go by. I feel like one of the things that I am taking from this is we had this obsession as a culture about hearing a little tidbit, a little nugget of information, and then being like, I'm going to ride this until I die. Like, that is the only way. And I feel like that's just something that I think is really important to recognize in yourself. And if you're laughing, yeah, I am. Like, I take it and then I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm going to go full throttle in this direction. I think we need to remember that pump the brakes and let's take one thing at a time. And I think the most important thing is, like, you're right, supporting and also adding in. We're not taking things away. When I say honor your cravings, I mean, if you're craving a Snickers bar, you're either going to eat a Snickers bar and move on with your life and then go have like a normal meal, or you're going to obsess about how you can't eat a bar because it's quote unquote bad for your hormones. And then you're going to go eat like a boring, sad salad, and then you're going to be hungry. And then next thing you know, when you go through the drive-thru, you're going to pick up like milkshakes and they'd be like, When like all you could have done was just had the Snickers bar and moved on with your life, because the sun will continue to spin, the world will still move, and everything will go on, and everything's going to be okay. And it's not going to be this like ending, like in time where like everything from here on out went horribly wrong, and now I'm perimenopausal and everything's out of control. That is a lie that you've been told for a long time, and you can honor your cravings and support your body at the exact same time. And it doesn't have to be ride or die only one way or the other. And I think that's like a huge misconception. And if you listen to our 5-Minute Friday episode that I think came out last week, you'll have some understanding about like how do we start to do that. And I think like to me, the key is the thing that I think is the most important thing that people forget about is, yes, energy trifecta, where we want to support our blood
Which
sugar.
we have a whole episode about that, by the way, which I will link in the show notes. Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing. I'm not even going to get into all that today. But the point is that, yes, we need to do that. But you know what the number one thing is for people for having completely dysregulated blood sugar? I have found it's not your carbs, guys. It's not your favorite little breads and your favorite little croissants and the things that you have. It's not it. It's not eating enough and eating inconsistently. And if you don't eat enough, under-eating is the worst thing you can do for brain fog, for mood swings, for sleep issues, for
your hormones,
for literally everything. If you're not giving yourself energy, where do you think your body's going to get it? Then let's not be shocked when we're saying things like, I'm tired, I'm not feeling well, I'm having brain fog, I'm having mood swings, I'm having these weird headaches, I'm having weird digestive issues. The point is how do you expect your body to do these functions if we're not giving it the energy in order to operate? And people might say, Christina, I eat, but are we eating enough? That's my major thing, because I feel like that's like the number one thing that people could be doing is actually taking a very hard look at their eating patterns and how much they're actually eating and if they're eating enough.
You know what's super interesting? We were just talking about this before we started recording is like, I work with a lot of teen athletes, and because I have coached swimming for so long, I work with a lot of swimmers, but I also work with like track athletes and gymnasts and like all other sports. But it's so interesting because you see this a lot in teens in something that used to be called the female athlete triad and is now called Red S. And I'll put some links about this. But basically what happens is this is when you are overtraining, which doesn't only happen to athletes, by the way. And then you are not eating enough, which is called low energy availability. And then you lose your cycle. When does this also happen? Perimenopause, right? But what's so interesting is that there are so many different health implications for long-term low energy availability or Red S. And one of the many things that can happen is when you are underfueling and overtraining, or just underfueling, dieting, restricting, whatever in general, you're actually reducing the amount of raw materials that you have in order to make hormones, right? So your estrogen is declining, whether you're a teenager or you're in your 40s and you're going, or 50s and going through perimenopause, the same thing can happen. This can impact your GI health. This can impact your thyroid health. This can impact your cholesterol. It can actually drive your cholesterol up when estrogen goes down because you are not providing your body with the raw materials to make enough hormones. And so it's so interesting to see this parallel between so many of the teenagers that I work with and then a lot of the women that are in perimenopause as well, because Red S can happen to anybody at any time. We don't want to purposely induce that, right? Our bodies are already going through an imbalanced time with perimenopause. Inherently, it is an imbalanced time. What we want to do is try to support our bodies as much as possible, knowing that there is an inherent imbalance. We don't want to induce that imbalance even more by undernourishing and overtraining because we're so afraid of gaining weight, because that is the prevailing narrative in perimenopause. It's, oh shit, I'm going to gain weight, so I need to restrict more and I need to do more exercise and I need to do all these things because I'm afraid of being obsolete and ugly. That is basically the marketing. That is, am I wrong? That's basically the marketing.
Just like laid it all out there. It was perfect. No.
I mean, I don't sugarcoat things.
No, it wasn't
Right?
sugarcoated at all. It was perfect. No, I mean,
It definitely wasn't.
It was absolutely right.
I mean, it's not pretty, but
No.
so then what we want.
Come from a very real, like facing reality a little bit here, right? And that's what you're.
But now we're going to be a little more gentle.
No, we're not going to end this ship. You know what I was just thinking about while you were talking about this? And this is purely off the cuff. I have no evidence around this, but I'm very curious about.
Oh, great.
About where the research lands with this. And I hope, well, right now there's no research allowed on women at all anymore. So we'll have to see what's going on. But I hope that someone does this and is self-funded in order to do this. But it would be really interesting to watch and to find out the increase in perimenopause and people taking GLP-1s and the fast track to perimenopause if people are becoming less fertile at a faster rate, because the whole design behind it is to reduce your food intake. That also slows down the absorption of nutrients too. And so that would automatically have theoretically, like if we're thinking about it from this perspective, you would long-term have a less available nutrient availability, right? And energy availability, which could then have downstream effects with your hormones and things like that too, and all this stuff. It'd be really interesting to see if there is this, as Ozempic rises and GLP-1 use rises, if there's also a decline or increase in, or like the decline in the age for perimenopause starting. It'd be really interesting. And I think that's also something kind of like to think about too. We're also talking about how perimenopause, people are saying, like, oh, it's happening younger. Why is that? Is that because we've all been over-exercising and over-dieting and restricting ourselves for the last 30 years? Perhaps. Perhaps.
Well, kids are also getting their periods younger.
I know. There's so many like interesting things happening with our hormones, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. The orthorexia.
Just don't go down the crunchy mom rabbit hole. Yeah,
the crunchy mom route, like it's a whole nother like can of worms. Do not go down that route. But I think it's really interesting. We want to make sure that we're giving ourselves enough and all of these things, and it does fearmonger around our body and around our size and around our longevity, and that's something that's really important to us. And we're scared about being invisible as we're getting older and like still feeling like, no, I'm just like coming into my prime. Like I feel that way. And so how do we prioritize some of these things to support our hormones and things like that without becoming obsessive? We're going to do a whole episode on called protein. So we're going to talk about that. So I'm not even going to talk about it. Just stay tuned. But I do think one thing that people need to start looking at is, what is the balance between movement that is supportive for our body and then movement that then like what is the line where it starts to teeter into not supportive anymore? And I think we need to be honest about that, because we hear these little reels and these things coming up like, oh, you need to increase your exercise. But if you're already over exercising and then you're being fed that you're not doing enough, and we don't have the perceptive like self-audit and awareness to look at that and say, oh, maybe I'm actually doing too much, we're not going to even consider reducing. We're going to consider that we're not doing enough. And so I think that now, like one of the things that I feel like is a big takeaway that's going to be really supportive is going into all of these things with some healthy skepticism around what are they saying? And does this apply to me? One of Dana's favorite things of like the prereqs is like, does this even apply to me? Yeah. Something of it.
Yeah, because we're not saying that you can't train and you can't do weightlifting and you can't do all these different things that you love, because actually
I love doing those things.
Like with the decline of estrogen, we have a higher risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis, right? And it is harder to put on muscle in perimenopause and in menopause. So it's actually very advantageous to do or to learn how to do some kind of resistance training or weight training to support your bone health, to support muscle health, because long term, we don't want to be falling and like breaking a bone or something. So the more cushion that you have and the more balance that you have, the better off we're going to be long term, right? In order to fuel that, you do need to be eating protein. It doesn't mean 200 grams of protein or something crazy like that, but you may need to be eating more protein than you were pre-perimenopause or pre-menopause, right?
You might even notice that you're starting to crave more things like that, right? You might be saying like, man, I just don't feel satisfied without having something else with this, or I need a little bit more than what I once had. And I think that's another thing about listening and understanding your body's language and how it's speaking to you. And that's another part of the honoring your body's cravings. Are we craving steak? And then we're like, oh my God, steak's bad for you. Let's also take a minute and think about why we're craving certain things, how that could be supportive, and what your body's trying to tell you.
Yeah. And the one thing that I'll say too is for all the people who feel like, oh, I really want to increase my exercise, whether or not you're already overtraining or not. Most people don't admit that they're overtraining.
No.
Right? But if you're really trying to increase your exercise, if you're training like an athlete, you need to eat like an athlete. Okay. And this doesn't mean that you're increasing your exercise and then you're then restricting your food. It also doesn't mean that you're increasing your exercise and keeping your food the same. You also need to increase the amount of food that you're eating in order to fuel that training if you want to get the benefits that we're talking about of more balanced hormones, less symptoms, and longevity.
Yeah. Such a great point that you just made about if you're training like an athlete, you need to feel yourself like an athlete. Even if you're like, oh, I go to the gym or I'm training for a half marathon. Girl, you need to be eating a lot more than you ever thought you needed to be. Otherwise, we're digging ourselves deeper into this hole, right? Like we have to be supporting ourselves. Another thing that I was thinking about too, as part of this, we've talked a little bit about movement. We've talked a little bit about food and the energy trifecta, which we're going to share with you an episode that's just purely on that. We're going to have a guide in the Patreon that you guys can check out and get access to if you're in there. But I think another thing too that there are like two things that I really want to touch on. One is I really want to touch on sleep and stress. And the other thing that I want to leave people with is that I want people to hear us talk about the weight changes and how hard that is too during this time. Because that is in so many ways the main motivating factor for why we get sucked in to these supplements and get sucked into these roads of I'm going to start increasing I'm going to start eating 200 grams of protein and I'm going to do all these things and like all the stuff that we're doing. And it's all under this guise of if I do those things, then I'll lose weight and I'll feel better about myself and everything will be solved. Because we have this idea that if your weight is managed, then everything else is perfect. That's not always the case.
And we parallel to that, we also have this idea that if your weight is going up in any way, then it means something is wrong that needs to be fixed.
Totally. Yeah. And I think in this time, it's like usually very common for you to start seeing weight changes. And it's very normal, not normal in society, right? And that doesn't mean that it's not something that's really triggering for you or really difficult or hard to manage. But weight shifts are totally normal when you're going through a hormonal redistribution. And it does not mean that your metabolism is shutting down. And it
just means you're going through perimenopause.
Yeah. And it's just really hard. And instead of focusing on, I have to lose weight, ride or die, I want you to then instead focus on how do I respect my body, support my body, build strength and work on my overall well-being? How do I take all of these things that I know that my body is going through right now and how do I support it in order to feel like I'm getting the energy that I need to have and that I feel really well? Because ultimately I find it's the day-to-day things that impact your day-to-day functioning that make us feel worse than it is necessarily about the number on the scale.
Even though we're told that it's the number on the scale that is impacting our quality of life and that makes you feel like crap.
Totally. And one of the things that I think is really hard too is I was actually just having this conversation with a client of mine right before this, where they don't even know what weight they're supposed to be, but they're looking at other people for it, and I think that's something that a lot of people do. What I mean is we were talking about how they're like, oh, my body has changed. And it's okay. That can be normal as you're growing, as you're getting older and blah, 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 and all the different things. And then one of the things that they were saying is, I really want to have a range where it's like safe for me. And what does this look like? And then you look at other people for what that's supposed to look like. But if we're all using a really distorted view of what your body is supposed to look like, then we're all going into this. Nothing about this is with any kind of clarity or understanding or actually based off of what your body actually needs. And so the best way to really understand where your body is and what your body needs is if your body is fully supported nutritionally and through movement and all the things. And if you have to do a bunch of stuff to make your body smaller, then that is not the size that your body was ever meant to be. And that is really, really, really hard.
I think the clap back to that is people will be like, but I was this size at this time of my life. And the hard thing about that is it's one thing to say, okay, I shouldn't compare my body to other people, but so many people compare their current body to their previous body size, whether it's in high school or it's in college or it's pre-kids or it's pre-something diagnosis or it's just 20 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever it is. And the hardest reality check that we have is that our bodies are going to change. That is the only constant. If your body has not changed since you were a teenager, you are malnourished, my friend, in most circumstances. And I think when I get people who come to me and they're like, oh my God, I just want to fit in my high school jeans. Listen, we're not Christina Aguilera on Ozempic, okay? We're not going back to the 90s. We're not doing that because that is an active state of malnourishment. And you know what's not good for your hormones? Malnourishment. So we're joking around a little bit, right? But like, this is really a really hard thing to wrap your head around. But the mindset shift that I want to encourage you to have is this is not a problem with your body. This is a body image problem.
Totally, and they're very separate.
It's not a physical problem with your body. It is the way that we are struggling to comprehend and be even relatively neutral about the ways that our body is changing. And it feels like we have no agency and no control over that because we've been told for so long, if we just manage our food and we just manage our exercise and we just do all these things, then our body will conform into this perfect pear-shaped, square-shaped, whatever size. And when you then try to do all of those things and it doesn't work, we're made to believe that it's a problem with us and we weren't doing enough. No, that's a body image problem. It's not a problem with your body.
100%.
And a societal problem.
You know, in case no one's told you, your body is not a moral failure. Just gonna leave that there. In case no one's told you, your body is not a moral failure. And it is really, really difficult to reconcile what Dana's talking about with my body as a problem versus a body image problem because they get so muddled together. Because as you see, every single chronic illness, weight is included as a symptom for it. And this is why, I don't know, like 3 years ago, we recorded an episode about is weight a symptom? So like in the old school episode. But I'll
find it.
But I think it's really interesting and something really important to remember. I love the way that you describe that, Dana, is that it's not a body issue. It's a body image problem. And there's a huge distinction. And I understand why you might be saying, but, because it's really difficult to reconcile those two things because weight is always included as a health problem. And it's really hard to reconcile those two things because that's how you end up going over and over and over here, over and over again of like, something must be wrong if my body is different. My labs can be fantastic. I can have great energy. I can have all these things, but oh, wait, you're still overweight, quote unquote. And so something must be wrong. And that is unfair. Your body is not a moral failure.
Society has morally failed you. No.
Well, yeah.
Well, so interestingly, little deep dive, that episode is almost 140 episodes ago.
What?
Insane. Yeah, but I will link it. I'll link it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a long time ago. Holy smokes.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder too, of like 140 episodes, a lot of time has changed. I'm curious to hear about what our evolution, even of ourselves and our perspective could come through. Bear with us, guys.
Yeah, we'll see. But we'll link all of this in the show notes. So here are the things you can do to follow up after this episode. We will link the energy trifecta episode. I'll also link the is weight a symptom. I'll also put some information on the red S and the female athlete triad stuff if you're interested. And then coming up, like Christina mentioned before, we will have a guide that goes with this episode. So like non-diet approaches to perimenopause on Patreon as well. That will be linked in the show notes. And then if you want to hear about protein, that will be next week's bonus episode on Patreon too.
I love it. I'm so excited about protein.
Okay. We'll see you guys then.